Hello, I'm Dr. Lipi Roy, and welcome to my brand new series, Health, Hockey, and Leadership. I've been merging my passion for medicine with media and entertainment for years, mostly through my YouTube show, Health, Humor, and Harmony, as well as through my frequent television media appearances on MSNBC, CNN, News Nation, as well as my articles in Forbes, as well as Psychology Today, and many other media outlets. But now I am merging my passion for health with hockey. As a Canadian, I have been following hockey since I was a little girl. From Jean Beliveau and Bobby Orr, who I met at an airport and had a wonderful conversation with, to Wayne Gretzky and Sidney Crosby, who I got to see play at Toronto's NHL All-Star game last year and at the most recent Four Nations face-off in Boston. I think hockey is the most exciting sport to watch. As a doctor, I also believe that hockey deals with a lot of really important health issues. In today's inaugural episode of HHL, I'll be speaking to four-time Stanley Cup champion and U.S. Olympic gold medalist Ken Morrow. We'll be joined by longtime New York-based sports writer Allan Kreda to discuss their new book, Ken Morrow, Miracle Gold, 4 Stanley Cups, and a lifetime of Islanders hockey. We'll talk about NHL players' grueling travel schedule, dealing with grief, Ken's multiple knee surgeries, and much more. Let's get started. Well, hello everyone. I'm Dr. Lipi Roy, and welcome to an inaugural episode of this brand new series called Health, Hockey, and Leadership. I am so thrilled to be talking to two amazing gentlemen and leaders, really in stalwarts in the hockey world. One is a longtime hockey writer, Allan Kreda, and the legendary four-time Stanley Cup champion and Olympic gold medalist for the U.S. hockey team, Mr. Ken Morrow. Thank you both, gentlemen, for joining me on my show.
It's great to be here with both of you. Thank you.
And we are, of course, here because we're talking about your book, brand new, hot off the shelves, Ken Morrow, Miracle Gold, 4 Stanley Cups, and a lifetime of Islanders hockey. Gentlemen, my viewers already know this, and you guys, we now have spoken several times. You both know that I'm an avid hockey fan. Ken, you already know this. I was born in Toronto, so I didn't grow up an Islanders fan. I did grow up a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, so don't hold that against me. But as you both know, I'm also I'm a physician, and I love merging my passion for medicine with media, sports, entertainment to reach as large an audience as possible. So on that note, I'm just going to start off. Ken, you talk about in this book from a grueling workout, training, and travel schedule, including a career involving, I believe, 8 knee surgeries and lengthy physical therapy and rehab. What does the term health really mean to you as a college and then pro athlete?
Yeah, again, thanks for having us on today, Lippy. And we're going to have to work on turning you into an Islander fan here. So
we'll see about that. I don't know. Right. Good
luck. What health means to me today would be staying active. I've always felt very strongly about staying active, whatever form that takes for most people. For me, it's like working out 3 or 4 times a week, going for walks, not just physically, but I think it's a lot of it's mental as well. You know, it relieves a lot of stress, and it just makes you feel better, both physically and mentally. So I try and do a lot of that. And the second thing would be moderation, you know, and I think that's pretty much with my eating habits. I'm not the best eater in the world, but try and do things in moderation. And then just regular doctor visits. I mean, I'm 68 years old now. I remember people telling me, when you get into your older age, it feels like you're going to the doctor all the time. But I make it a point to make sure I do regular doctor visits, and I try and stress that with my kids as well.
Yeah. You also talk about, I mean, and I've had multiple conversations with Allan about this. Allan, you've gone to so many games, covering the games. You know that these athletes do not have 9 to 5 jobs or careers, but neither do you. And frankly, neither do most doctors. So that's something that I think all three of us can relate to, good and not so good, right? Um, uh, I'm curious, just before we get to you, Allan, I think Ken, you talked about your knee issues and your knee surgeries, undergoing several surgeries. Tell us a little bit about like what that was like for you. Here you are trying to, go back into the game, play pro hockey at that elite level, but you're having pain, ongoing pain, and these surgeries, the long time recovery from that. What was that like for you?
Well, first of all, I don't want to make it sound like I was kind of the only one going through this. Every athlete goes through some form of injury or pain. So this was not unique to me. But in my case, I played 10 years in the NHL, 4 years of college, a year with the Olympic team. So your career is longer than just the 10 years that you play in the NHL. And I had some knee issues early in my career. When I joined the Islanders, I ended up having uh, 4 knee surgeries in my first 4 years with the New York Islanders. And the first 3 were arthroscopic surgeries that were during the season. In fact, the first one was during our first playoff run. And I had never heard of arthroscopic surgery up to that point. I think it was a fairly new procedure, but what it allowed me to do is I had a surgery on a Wednesday during our second playoff series. I missed one game and I came back and played on the following Saturday. So I was out of the lineup for only 3 days, which was unheard of really at that time. I ended up having a couple more of those the next 2 years, and then eventually led to a full blown knee surgery where I missed 3 quarters of the season in 84, 85. So that was the story of my knee surgeries when I was playing. And then the final 5 years of my career after my last surgery were more trying to manage the damage that I was playing with at that time, a lot of swelling and just trying to stay in the lineup as much as I could.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Ken, I've I've cared for a lot of patients and even family members who've undergone all different types of surgeries, and it's not only a physical recovery, it's very much mental as well, right? So, and you're trying to balance that with a pretty high pressure kind of career as well. So, so thank you for sharing that, Allan. Really quickly, like, what does health mean to someone like a sports writer like you, who's covering multiple games in a very high pressure sports passionate city like New York? What does health mean to someone like you?
I try to stay focused, get enough sleep, prepare for each game in a mental way. I'm focusing on these two teams today, this series of events and situations, so not to get overly distracted. And it's just staying in the moment. I think day to day, game to game, it's a practice of staying present.
Yeah.
So to me, that's eating right, eating. I don't like eating during games. I never like that. So I try to get all that out of the way, plan for it in the context of the day leading it, like, because my energy has to be focused on the writing on the screen, on the game in hand. I don't want anything else around me. And sleep's a big deal. I'm a night owl by nature. I think that's years on the sports desk, years of staying up late to watch West Coast games in the East Coast. So those genes, I don't know, they were there and they got sort of accelerated by my lifestyle and work style. So I just try to stay in the healthful moment, eating well, not overdoing anything, and just staying focused. And little known fact, I as an undergrad have a biology degree. I was in a pre-med world, so science and health and all of that stuff's in my brain somewhere. And it also somehow makes me, I think, extra sensitive. I'm always interested in talking to players as much as they'll talk about injury recovery. I can only imagine how difficult that is. to play at that level and deal with what they deal with. So I'm sort of extra sensitive to the science side.
Well, Alan, one of the notes I made while reading this wonderful book that you and Ken wrote is that you were pre-med. I did not know that. So next time we meet up, we can talk about math and
Yeah,
chemistry, okay?
organic chemistry. That's what changed the dynamic of the
Or
arc of my career
well,
away from science.
something that you both mentioned, which that struck so closely to me as a former primary care doctor and internal medicine doctor, is, and something that I deal with to this day with taking care of a lot of patients who are experiencing substance use disorders and addiction. You both talk about the importance of sleep and how critical it is. It's not always possible to get those good 7, 8 hours, especially with our stressful jobs, careers. I know you're now the director of pro scouting for the Islanders, Ken, but back in your heyday when you're traveling every day or every other day and practices, but it's so critical to get, certainly as adults as well, at least that 7 to 8 hours of quality, like high quality sleep, because we know that chronic sleep deprivation is associated with every chronic illness from heart disease, cancer to dementia. So thank you for talking about that. Ken, I also want to say that while reading the book, which again, it was such a nice, easy read for me, and easy in that it's just so smoothly written, it's well written, it's so easy to follow, and as a hockey fan, it just flowed like suspensefully too. So it was really entertaining and informative for me. So you talk about in the book, Ken, you talk about how you've experienced the loss of some close people in your life, including your father when you were only 19, and I believe your dad was either 46 or 48, right?
Yes,
And
48. Yes.
yeah,
Mhm.
he was only 48, and he was a really athletic guy. He was like playing like recruited to Detroit Tigers, I believe. And then you also later in your life, in your career, you talk about the loss of like, really close teammates from the Islanders and who became friends, like Clark Gillies and Mike Bossy, really just a couple of years ago. I'm curious, as you know, everyone deals with loss and grief. And you're a public figure, and so you're kind of dealing with this also publicly as well. But I'm curious how you dealt with the loss of these people that were so close in your life.
Yeah, as you mentioned, everybody goes through it at various times of their lives. For me, the hard one, the first hard one for me was my father. I was 19 years old, freshman in college, and I actually he had just found out, that he was fairly sick right before I left for college in the fall, and it was hard for me to leave home, but he assured me that was what he wanted me to do. He was looking out for my best interests at the time. So I did. I went to school, only a couple hour drive away. So I was able to come back home when I needed to.
The Bowling
But
Green, right, Ken?
yes, Bowling Green. We grew up in Flint, Michigan, which where my father was at the time. So yeah, that was the first thing. Was just it was hard to leave. But uh, not being there, probably my biggest, if I have regrets, was that I wasn't there, even though he wanted me to be at school, that I couldn't have been there more for him. And he went downhill fairly quickly. So um, I think there was, a lot of shock, I guess, maybe to see somebody so, as you mentioned, athletic and strong. He was 6'5", you know, um, a, a big guy and very athletic, and to see him, quickly deteriorate was hard, very hard. And um, the way I internalized things back in those days. I was a very quiet guy. Still am. I consider myself pretty quiet, but a lot of internalization on things, kept things to myself. That's the way my dad was. And again, a regret is that I just never got to know my father better. He kept things pretty quiet. Didn't and this book, the nice thing about this book, and thanks for the kind words, are that I was able to kind of do some research and really dig back and find out even some new things about my father that I hadn't really known at that time. So I think just leaning on family and friends. My advice to people whenever you're going through something, and I give this advice to anybody. I say you got to lean on your family and friends as much as you can,
Yeah.
and you got to, that stress relief we talked about with your health, staying active, relieving stress. Whether it's working out, whether it's again going for bike rides, whatever. I think that's very important.
Well, I have to tell you, when Alan and Ken, when you wrote that part about your dad, Ken, it really it was very emotional for me because so this March 16th will be the 2-year anniversary of my own father's passing.
Mm-hmm.
And we are very fortunate in that my dad lived until he was 89. He died of heart failure, and so it was a progressive decline. But
Yeah,
it's never enough, right?
never easy.
Always,
Never enough.
my mom and dad were married for 52 years, and my mom was like, "Oh, if you could have just been with us just one more year, one more year,
Right,
And
right.
but the way you in the book you describe your father, Ken, it just so reminded me of my dad. It sounded like your dad was just so unconditionally supportive. It sounded like he was your number one fan. He just wanted
Yes,
you give a lot of credit to your dad, well, your family, but really your dad for like what taking those games and that
yes.
encouragement,
Mhm.
right?
Yes, yeah. He coached me and my brother growing up, and the thing is, he was a professional baseball player. So here's a guy that played baseball, and he never pushed me and my brother into baseball. We tried it. It wasn't my game. I wasn't very good at it, and it was too boring for me. After you play a game like hockey, which is nonstop action, to go out there and stand in the outfield or sit in the dugout, wait for your turn to bat, it just wasn't for me. I enjoy watching baseball, but to play it, so I tried baseball and figured out that hockey was a sport I loved, and he was behind that all the way. He didn't try and force me or my brother into it, and he's the one that actually got me and my brother started playing hockey on a small backyard rink.
Well, the reason I think it's important to talk about these topics is because grief and loss are just so universal. And when we think of like the hockey community, which the three of us love so much, we saw this just very recently with the Gaudreau brothers passing away, and it affected not just their teammates, but really the hockey community. I was in Europe when I heard about the event, and I just dropped everything that I did. I was just in such shock. It just the ripple effect, and you guys also in the book talk about Pelle Lindbergh. In fact, the last time I saw Alan, we were talking about Pelle Lindbergh, how he was a Swedish incredibly talented Swedish goaltender who he was 26, right, Alan, when he died in
Yep.
a car crash, right? And these things affect all of us, right? And have the hockey community is no different from the rest of the world. And I appreciate Ken you sharing that, what I think is key is important. It's important to lean on the people that are close to you, your family, your friends, people you trust. Some people internalize it. Grief looks different to different people at different time points. So I appreciate you sharing that. Alan, anything you want to share about just about the grief and loss and just that part of the book about Ken's dad?
I, I was very sensitive to that, and I'm glad we did that interview in person. That's when we did face to face, and I wanted to make sure it was relayed, told, written exactly as Ken wanted it to be. That's how I really thought the whole book should be, is now existing. But I'm sensitive to the threads of life and loss. I have a very high threshold of empathy, so I get it, and I feel things strongly. I'm like that. I've given plenty of eulogies myself. I find a higher power when I need to find the words, and if I could help anyone relay a story that helps other people understand where they're coming from, that's to me the greatest gift a writer can have. So I bring some heart into it, and I felt like the dads are so universal in hockey in general. It's such a dad-centered sport, and my own dad passed th 3 years ago, and the outpouring just from people that knew me or knew him a little bit, or met him. Roger Bear met him along the way, so there were people that knew him, people that knew me through him, and it was like this group hug from the hockey world because enough people said to me, "Look, he'll be with you at every game because he was with you at all those other games." So it's real. Like I get it, and this that chapter, it was emotional for me,
Well,
and
I
I
had a
understand
feeling
it.
that was the case, Alan, because you and I have also talked about how we had just lost our own dads just about I think a year apart, and this kind of brings back to a section of the book, Ken, where you talk about how every game you go to, it was a tradition for you. I think was it during the anthem, or you look
Yes.
up to the rafters, and you so your dad is with you every game. So I thought that was just really touching.
Thank you. That's a true story. Every game, there wasn't one game I didn't look up at the flag toward the end of the national anthem, whether it was the Olympics, college, Olympics, and then every game with the Islanders. So
Yeah.
that was my inspiration.
Um,
Yeah.
well, so Alan, going back to something you just said about being a storyteller, and this is what you
Mhm.
do, and stories, this is what I do, as I think doctors are also storytellers. Every time we meet a patient, we are listening to them tell their story and then conveying it in whether
Yep.
we write our medical notes or in the scientific articles or other articles that we write. And Alan, as a longtime sports writer, an author, you are such an amazing storyteller. I'm curious why, after all these years, and I know you talk about how when you met Ken like decades ago, but why did you decide to tell the world about Ken Morrow's story?
This was it was the word organic keeps coming to mind. It was the right time, the right moment, the right situation, but it was almost as if I was ready for this for a long time, way before the Olympics were in my mind. I was 14, that gold medal day in 1980, watching it. I lived through all the Islander Ranger epic playoff series, the Islanders winning the cup every year in the early 80s. I knew everything about everything to do with these teams, these players, these stories from a distance. And then years into my career, meeting the alumni has always been a favorite part of the job. I go out of my way to hear stories, share stories, listen to better stories that haven't been told. They're endless. And as players move away, later in their careers, lives, willing to share at different levels. But I even when I was a kid, I loved watching Yankees Old Timers Day. I wanted to see those guys who weren't playing pop out of the dugout again. So that was an extension. I think I'm just a little different in wanting to flip back in history. So the Hockey News asked me to write a piece a couple of years ago just on the Dynasty 16, plus a few players that won two or three cups, and just talked to as many as I could for this basically oral history of the championship era. And in the course of that, the Islanders thankfully had invited most everyone back for their 50th anniversary season alumni gathering, and Ken was there. We chatted a bit. I said, "Can I give you a call?" And we had met, talked here and there over the years. And I just, while we were talking out a few questions I had for this piece, the wheels were turning. I was like, these are great. These are such great stories, so eloquently told. I said, why don't, I think there's a book here. What do you think? And it just happened. It just sort of went from there. I had a feeling, an inkling that this would be special for multiple reasons, mainly that there were two tracks, the Olympics and the Islanders, two distinct but intertwined hockey championship legacies and all the people that were sort of part of both Olympians that played in the NHL, Herb Brooks coaching against the Islanders for the Rangers. I had a lot of ideas of what questions I wanted to ask as we moved along. And then Ken just tells amazing stories. We just had fun resharing, rewatching games that back in the early 80s, there was no VCR, there was no YouTube. There was no Twitter to watch. You had to watch it once and never see it again in your mind. So you remembered things, I think, even more detailed in the one. But we went back and watched games together, and that was fun. I mean, we literally started our interviews with 1980. I said, let's pick a year and take it from there. We picked 1983, the fourth cup. And he
Yeah.
told the amazing story of how in the group hug after the empty net goal, I love you guys. I said, we're starting there. We're right there already. Like that
Yeah.
story, fans may not know it. They'll read that and love that. The guys, Nystrom, Tonelli, Dennis Puffin, loved hearing the story again. We were shooting little videos when we did our interviews and sending it to them.
Yeah.
It was really neat. Like I love connecting the dots for people, and if I can, like the relationships, if they move a little forward because of this book, these guys are their legacy story. So it was all of it. It was Ken plus all those great teammates that I was able to thread together in this really, it was really an awesome experience to do.
Well,
Yeah,
and
and Lippy, I can tell you the book wouldn't have happened without Allan. And as you can tell, just listening to him today, um, I was sold right away. He's not only a fantastic hockey writer in today's world, but I found out quickly he's kind of an old soul with the history of the game,
yeah,
and he knew more about those years than I did a lot of times.
yeah,
He did a bulk of the work on the book, and he gave me a real framework to
yeah.
work from. And the first couple of days I started this project, I said, "What did I get myself into?" But as I tell people now, it became a much more enjoyable experience for me than I was expecting,
Yeah.
and that was all due to Allan. And so I'm just very thankful for the way everything went, the way it's turned out, and we keep talking, Allan and I, about just let's have some fun with it now, and that's where we're going from here. So.
Well, I love this as a hockey fan. This means so much to me. And so, speaking of, in our last few moments, I'd like to ask you both, what does hockey mean to you? Can you go ahead?
Well, it means my life. Basically, hockey means my life, and when you look back, the one thing that this book did, it reminded me of fate. How many things in your life happen, and then you look back and you say, fate made me go in this direction. Fate made me make this decision, and I didn't realize until going through this book that there were a lot of fateful moments. And so I guess maybe the first one for me was just putting on a pair of skates in my backyard at 5 years old. And who'd have thought? A lot of kids do that now, but who'd have thought? The rest of my life would revolve around hockey. So playing in the National Hockey League is a privilege that I never take for granted. I always remind myself how lucky I was to be able to play 10 years in the league. And then on top of that, the success that happened, I always ask myself the question, why me?
Yeah.
Why was I so fortunate to have all these great things happen in my life and because of hockey? So just grateful and thankful are the two things that I think about when that word hockey is mentioned.
Well, thank you for that. Can you really summarize that really beautifully? And I know Alan, hockey is your life. You're an amazing sports writer, hockey writer. But I also want to, before we finish, what does leadership? What does it really mean to be a leader to both of you? Alan, I'll start with you.
Well, I've observed leaders. I've observed the way they are, at least from my journalistic distance. So I like to watch personalities in action and what they do, how they do it. I mean, getting to know Dennis Potvin as well as I have over the years, this 4 Stanley Cup captain, wrote the foreword for this book so eloquently. So
Wonderful.
honored to have him be part of it. And just, I mean, here's a player that had to bring it together to will this franchise to winning after some brutal years of frustration in the late 70s, losing to Toronto on a Lanny McDonald overtime goal as part of that.
Yeah.
In 1978, losing to the Rangers in a year where they were the upstart out of nowhere, beating the Islanders in the semifinal. Epic 1979. These were tough losses, but
Yeah.
leadership, I think, watching it through the eyes of someone like Dennis and knowing what he went through, how he was able to then do what he did and have the guys rally around him. I
Yeah.
mean, the book revolves around that 1980 Ken Morrow joining the team,
Yeah.
leads the trade for Butch Goring, which has always been cited as the catalyst
Yeah.
to the Islanders needed beyond, but is really Ken joining, Butch Goring joining, and as Billy Smith asked me in our very brief interview that did make the book, who was the third player who just joined that year that was so critical, and it's Gord Lane, who
Yeah.
came earlier that season. So I listen to what leaders say and how they act. Of course, I can't know what's in the room,
Yeah.
but you get a sense of the personalities. I mean, Clark
Yeah.
Gillies was captain for a while too. Is such a strong personality. I think hockey, the captaincy, what you have to do to bring a team together, it's a hard job. It's the most visible captain in
Uh,
sports.
so Mr. Ken Moore, I'm going to give you the last word in terms of what does leadership look like to you, and I'll leave you with the last word, Ken.
Thank you, Lipi. Leadership comes in many different forms, but speaking from a sports team's perspective and as a player, to me, there were two different kinds of leaders in the locker room. There were the vocal leaders, the guys that were, the rah-rah guys that could get guys going, getting up and giving a speech or cheering guys on. And they're very important. And then to me, maybe even more important are the leaders by example. And I can speak as a scout on this because when I'm up watching players, I'm looking for those kind of qualities, guys that lead by example. Hey, guys, follow me. Not so much vocal as they are through their actions and the way they play. And everybody else feels like, hey, I got to play as hard as this guy. And when you have enough of those on your team, they can, carry along the other guys as well. The other thing I would say is that, I've heard the phrase that, it's easy to play when things are going well. Most guys can follow along when everything's going well for you. But I think true leadership shows itself when adversity strikes. And so, at any time during a game or a season and you're going through some adversity, true leaders are the ones that can pull you through those times. And when you have enough of those, and those Islander teams and our Olympic team had plenty of those. I know Mike Rizioni, the captain of our Olympic team, his quote is always, "I was a captain among captains." We had a lot of captains on our team, so that bodes well for success.
Well, the reason I ask about leadership in this series, Health, Hockey, and Leadership, is because, to your point, Ken, and your earlier point, Allan, leadership does manifest in different ways. You don't have to be that loud person. You can also be somebody who's a quiet leader. And in this book, both of you gentlemen describe your leadership. Several of the people that are interviewed in your book describe your leadership, Ken. Your style is being that quiet leader. You lead by example. You show up. You're perseverant. You're resilient. And certainly as a physician, I must say I've been blessed to observe and learn from really strong fellow physician leaders, nurses, physical therapists, social workers, behavioral therapists, psychologists, people that are just show up and do what needs to be done, whether it be saving lives or just helping the team gather equipment. That's what leadership really is. And so on that note, I am incredibly grateful to both of you for writing this book, telling this story, sharing your stories about health and hockey and leadership. So thank you both, gentlemen, very much.
Thank you, Lipi.
Thank you very much.
I am so grateful to Ken and Allan for writing this entertaining and thoughtful book and for sharing Ken's extraordinary hockey journey. I've had the good fortune of meeting Ken and Allan on multiple occasions in person. Ken always expresses his gratitude. He knows how lucky he is. Did he work hard? Of course he did. But most NHL players work hard. Only a minority go on to win the Stanley Cup, let alone multiple consecutive times. I am grateful to Ken also for his honesty and vulnerability in discussing his father's death. Hockey players are indeed human too. As a physician, I hope the NHL continues to address players' mental health and emotional needs, optimize players' health and safety by improving their sleep regimens and reducing serious brain injuries. In future episodes, I'll discuss hockey and mental health, addiction, recovery, and much more. Here's your joke of the day, hockey themed. What do hockey players and magicians have in common? They both perform hat tricks. Well, that's all for today. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube show, write comments below, and follow my Instagram at Health, Humor, Harmony, Dr. Roy. Be well, and I'll see you soon.